Hey y'all, and welcome back to Bell's Book Stop. I'm so excited that you decided to give my channel another go. Or if this is your first time here, I'm Belle, and I am exploring my love for reading through this YouTube channel, mostly through book reviews. I may or may not do a book haul. I still need to do an intro video, so but really, like, the purpose of this channel is just to read more, read with intention, and stop bothering my husband with book summaries of books every time I finish reading them. And so I'm excited to hop right into my second book review. I just finished, I would say, a couple of days ago, the book Fourth Wing. This is a super popular book by Rebecca Yarros. I think that's how you say her last name, but it's really taken the internet. It has taken book talk specifically by storm. There are supposed to be, I believe, 5 books in this series. This is book 1. Following this is Iron Flame, and I believe the third book, Onyx Storm, is set to be released in January of 2025. So right around the corner. And I decided to give it a go. When I like to buy books on sale or secondhand, and so I was in Target, and I have this habit of every time that I go into Target perusing the book section just to see what's out there. And I saw this book, it was 20% off. And so I was like, everybody is raving about this book, so why not give it a try? And it's in some ways right up my alley, and also in a lot of ways not right up my alley. So Fourth Wing, I'll start with how it is up my alley, considering I haven't done an intro video yet, but it's fantasy. I love fantasy. I love anything with dragons or warlocks or, I also really enjoy science fiction, that sort of thing. World building is just super interesting to me. I want to feel transported away from real life. That's my favorite kind of reading. It's always been my favorite kind of reading. And this book, it's just that. I mean, there's like a little dragon. I don't know if you can see on the screen. And so I love it. It's a totally different world from our own, with different expectations and things like that. So very, very up my alley there. On the other hand, this book is really the genre that I've been hearing a lot with associated with this book is romantasy. So it is a fantasy book that has a plot that in part is heavily driven by romance. That is where it's not my cup of tea. I am very much so a girly who loves, I love a little spice in our stories. I love a good love interest or something that's piquing our interest, but it can't be the major plot of a book or you'll lose me. I really very much so love fantasy as a subplot and not a main plot. And a romantasy in a Fourth Wing, I wouldn't say that the romance is the main plot of this book, but it is heavy on the romance. And I love the spicy scenes, don't get me wrong, but there's a point where you're kind of questioning, like, what is the plot of this other than maybe these two characters potentially ending up together. It isn't in that way, of course, but and that way it's kind of not necessarily my jam. Another thing that was interesting to me about this book and made me really kind of look inwardly about what types of books I like, what types of books I don't like, is this book also was very, very close to the book Divergent, like the book series for Divergent. I can only say Divergent because I actually haven't finished the rest of the Divergent series. I just actually picked up my first Divergent book in 2024. And when I say the tropes are very similar, if you liked Divergent, I think that you'll really like Fourth Wing. For me, I wouldn't say that I loved Divergent, and that's going to be evident. It's already coming through in my review of Fourth Wing. They're very similar. Here, you are looking at quadrants versus Divergent had factions. There are 4 main quadrants. I don't remember how many factions were in Divergent. But basically the premise of the story is a girl, in this book, she's in her early 20s, who is small and weak and frail and thrown into, in this case, is thrown into versus in Divergent, she chooses to go into this kind of like really badass quadrant or faction. So in this book, she, the main character's name is, oh my goodness, I forgot the main, her last name is Sorengale, Violet Sorengale. And there are 4 factions, and she has been training her whole life to be in the scribe quadrant, which is all about writing and reading and history and not about like kicking ass and taking names. She's forced to go into the writer quadrant by her mother. No spoilers here. That's another thing, I'm gonna really try hard not to have any spoiler reviews. So, and her job is to survive the writer's quadrant and potentially, you know, make sure that she is bonded to a dragon. And I love the action in this book. I love the fighting. It's really good. It's very interesting. It's exciting. I find myself like, I'm a type of reader where I act things out as I'm reading it. And I really found myself doing that across the crux of this book. And so I would say you kind of get to go almost 3/4 of the book before you fall into the romance component of it. It's there very lightly. So overall, I really enjoyed the book. It was when I got into the last quarter of the book where everything was circling around, you know, romance and like, what does he think of me? That they kind of lost me. And that's saying something, considering for me, I'm not really a big fan of the small, weak, has barely trained for something very intensive heroine. It just is not realistic to me. I'm also not a small person, and so I don't find it relatable. I'm kind of athletic myself, and so it's just super unrealistic to think that someone who has never done or trained in this way would show up and like beat people in hand-to-hand combat. It throws me. Divergent was very much so like this. I kind of prefer a Katniss Everdeen type heroine, right? Someone who it makes sense, even if she hasn't trained to you know, fight and be at war her whole life. She very much so kind of like has the upbringing and the background to rely on in order to allow her to kind of come out on top. So I know I'm talking about like what's realistic in a story about dragons. That's something that, you know, I can work through and maybe doesn't come up for you. But for me, it's definitely something that it just makes me roll my eyes when I'm reading, just like how weak. And I didn't count, but they almost called this girl weak like once every 6 pages. So it just becomes relatively unrealistic that she's just going to outsmart everything all of the time and survive all of the time, despite like having none of the real skills needed. I think she trained maybe 6 months before coming in, whereas other people train their whole lives. But essentially, one of the things I did like, so I don't seem like I completely hated this book, because I didn't. I actually really enjoyed it. It was a very fun, fast-paced novel, fiction book. But I loved the diversity in Fourth Wing. It didn't feel forced, but it was almost surprising. I'm not used to reading fantasy books, particularly by non-Black, Indigenous, or, you know, other people of color, where there is such a diverse cast of characters. And that's something that Rebecca Yarros does really, really well. They're non-binary characters. There are characters who are very clearly Black or South Asian. At least that's how I read the characters, at least. And it's not much of a discussion. There's not much focus on it. It's just like, this is a diverse group of people and they're all trying to survive the writer's quadrant and doing whatever they need to do to do so. One of the things that was really interesting that I've seen a lot on Book Talk, there's a character in here. I don't want to give away too much because I don't want to give spoilers, but his name is Xaden. And there's been such a discussion about Xaden's race online, on Instagram, on TikTok. And it's so interesting to me that quite a few people have discussed coding him as a Black man. I did not read him as Black at all. Like, I read him as like maybe, you know, Middle Eastern, Persian, maybe, you know, North African, South Asian. Specifically, Yarros' descriptions of his hair just did not code to me as being a Black man. But it's been really interesting because this book has been picked up, I believe, for a series through Michael B. Jordan's like his production company. And one of the non-negotiables that Yarros has had is that there is no whitewashing of her characters, in particular Xaden. Xaden is a very big character in the book. You can't go too many pages without reading about him. And so I thought that was also really interesting. That was just me doing like a little bit of research on the end. So all in all, I did like this book. There are some things that I had qualms about. Like I said, like the weak, unassuming heroine really gets under my skin. But there's just enough like magic and daring feats and, you know, survival and death, which sounds very odd. I sounded really excited when I said death. To keep me hooked. And to be quite honest, at the very end, there's a hook or a twist, but I'm not sure I would necessarily call it a twist. I didn't see it coming. It got me really excited, especially through all of the heavy romance that was like appearing to be more of the plot than the end plot, than what I thought should have been the ultimate plot. That I'm excited to read Iron Flame. I want to know what's going to happen next. There are characters who die in this book that I was sad. There was one character who died and it was all I could do but like choke back tears. I really felt like there was good character development in the book. I felt like it is an adventure that worth sticking around for. So I think all in all, I would probably give it a 3.5 out of 5. I try not to do like 7.75 or 0.25. I try to give myself some credit with some half stars. The romance at the end of the day was just like a little bit too heavy-handed for me. That as a genre is something that I want to try to continue to read more of and stretch myself, but sometimes it just gets repetitive. And I felt like there were just like 30 pages in Fourth Wing that we just honestly, we could have done without. But like I said before, the character development was great. Would I rather the main character have been Rhiannon? Because I find her to be incredibly fascinating, more along the lines of what I'm looking for in a heroine, 100%. But Violet is not completely someone that I'm not interested in. So I am interested to see what happens next. There's definitely going to be some internal fighting, like familial wise. You really have to decide whose side are you on. And it's going to be a really difficult thing for Violet to figure out. And so I am really interested. I just hope that in Iron Flame, there's a little bit of tamping down on the romance plot and that like the the fantasy plot, the plot of like riding and training and working with dragons and guarding borders and subverting rebellion or being a part of a rebellion really takes on the really returns to the front seat of the series. If Yarros can do that in Iron Flame, I think she'll have me. I think after that I'll just be committed to reading the entire series just so I can see how it turns out. But if it really feels overrun by romance, I'm not quite sure that I have the stomach for it for five books. We'll see. Sometimes I like to finish things based on principle. But overall, I think it's worth a read. It may be my reasons for not being head over heels like the rest of the internet for this book are not deal breakers for you. I mean, they're certainly still not deal breakers for me, but maybe it will, romance is your thing and you're really into that. On the other hand, if you're really looking for some world building, something new, a bunch of names you don't know how to pronounce, and learning about things that, we only really see in our dreams, I think Fourth Wing is worth the read. So, I would love to know if you've read Fourth Wing, what you think about the book. Is there anything that I am overlooking that maybe you loved or hated about the book? This is less of a summary and just more of a review. It will have you at times on the edge of your seat or reading until 2 a.m. if you let it. So, but yeah, that's my review of Fourth Wing, and I hope to see you for my next video.